Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to invite every one of you here. And it's my privilege to invite Mr. Nitin Vyas, Managing Director and CEO of Boomer India, to chair this session. Mr. Nitin Vyas is the Managing Director and CEO of Boomer India Private Limited, has been working in the leadership position of Boomer Group of India subsidiaries. Over to Mr. Nitin Vyas. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhanu. Good afternoon, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to virtual conference on Global Supply Chain Summit 2022 with the topic of the supply chain in the new millennium with three topics in it: resilient digital twins, connected warehouses, and sustainability. Welcome to the panelists. Before I introduce the panelists, the topic, this is the third session of the day, which we are doing. It's sustainability in the supply chain and operations. It gives me, before I start introducing my fellow panelists, I would like to talk a couple of minutes about CII, Institute of Logistics. Confederation of Indian Industry is one of the biggest industry body. And CII has got a different center of excellence across India who are supporting Indian industry through various services on key areas of India's sustainable growth. To address the need of sharpening India Incorporation's competitive edge through better logistics and supply chain practices, CII Institute of Logistics was established as a center of excellence in logistics and supply chain. The Institute creates a platform for Indian industry to gain more insights into emerging trends, industry-specific problems of national importance, and global best practices in logistics and supply chain management. With relentless aspirations to enhance logistics competitiveness in industry, CII Institute of Logistics also provides complete range of services such as education, conducting short-term and long-term courses, on its own and also with some partners across the globe. It also runs a CII Institute of Logistics, and I should say that CII Institute of Logistics, since it has come into existence, has got 100% placement record year on year. CII Institute of Logistics also does training at different levels for logisticians. It does an advisory service, research and publications, and events like today's. So once again, welcome to the session 3 of the day, Sustainability in Supply Chain and Operations. I would like to welcome our fellow panelists. First of all, a warm welcome to Mr. Vivek Sarabhai, who is the Senior Director, Supply Chain and Environment Health Safety in Thermo Fisher Scientific India Private Limited. He has a successful career of around 3 decades at executive level, a functional leader. He has worked majorly in Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa for global FMCG organizations like Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola, Baxter, and Mondelez, covering the domain of integrated business planning, strategic sourcing, procurement, and customer service. Managing complexity in terms of portfolio, geography, network, and culture is his strengths. Welcome, Mr. Sarabhai, to this panel discussion.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. My pleasure.
Once again, it's my privilege to having a second session with Ms. Neelam Pandey Pathak, Director Sourcing and Analytics, Nordex Group. She works for as a Director Sourcing and Analytics AGSO, which is Asia Sourcing Global Organization at Nordex Group. She has almost 20 years experience in automobile and power domain. She has taken up various roles in her career in new product development, program management, strategic sourcing, manufacturing, and analytics. We have 2 more panelists yet to join. I'll introduce them. I think they will be joining in next 10 minutes due to the schedule issues. Mr. Ashutosh Srivastav, he is the Head of Operations, Reliance Fashion and Lifestyle. He's an MBA graduate from IIM Kozhikode, with a core experience in supply chain operation management, supply ecosystem management, and logistics. He's currently working in a leadership team, shaping and executing overall company's strategy towards strengthening its market leadership position and driving profitability. Last but not the least, who will be joining us in 10 minutes time from McKinsey and Company Frankfurt, Mr. Jurgen Rock. He's a senior expert in McKinsey and Company operations practice focused on manufacturing and supply chain. He has been working with McKinsey since 2009. Since he had joined, he's been serving different clients across industry with a focus on chemicals and automotive suppliers, advanced electronics, on variety of topics, especially on end-to-end supply chain planning, advanced analytics in manufacturing and supply chain and production optimization. So once again, a warm welcome to all the panelists. Before we get into the panel discussions, I would just like to set the tone. So sustainability, it's being talked in every nook and corner of the business in the present day. The sustainability, as we understand in journal as well as in supply chain and operation, is environmental, social, and governance issues. Why sustainability? And I believe sustainability is good not only for the planet but also for the business. And that's where McKinsey's analysis shows that top ESG performers enjoy faster growth and higher valuation than the other players in the sector by the margin of 10 to 20% in each area. And I can quote one example of one of the leading footwear manufacturer who moved with a focus in design and development of some of the great footwear with ESG in the center of the theme, could increase their margins by 0.25% already. So where does sustainability in supply chain should start? It is, I believe, to be aware of your company's ESG's impact and then making necessary changes to lessen it. So if you don't know where you are, what you're going to do is a question. And as I mentioned, it is good for the business. And also it is important to know where does it start? Where does we start? But I see a sustainability also from another lens in the present day when there are a lot of disruptions happening in supply chain due to geopolitical situations, due to pandemic, and it's a continuing thing. One has to be sustainable when you're doing not only the supply chain, but supply chain can only be sustained when your designs are right, sourcing is right, logistics is right. But at the same time, I would say the sustainability has to be resilient to overcome the challenges posed by the issues such as pandemic, geopolitical situation in this VUCA world. So leaving these open thoughts, I would start the conversation, the panel discussion. First, I would like to invite Mr. Vivek Sarabhai to give his views, his thoughts, his speech on sustainability in supply chain and operations. Mr. Vivek Sarabhai, over to you.
Thank you, Nitin. And if you can just confirm if I'm audible. Am I audible?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks once again, CI, for inviting me. It's my pleasure. So let me just take a couple of minutes to explain a bit about my company, where I work. So Thermo Fisher Scientific is actually the world leader in serving science with annual revenues of approximately $40 billion. Our mission is actually to enable our customers to make the world healthier, cleaner, and safer. So very much, if you look at our mission statement, we are very, very focused on ESG and our operations, and even as for our customers, and even we select our vendors who are committed to driving a sustainable business. So this is our business. It's a very complex business from that perspective because it has got multitude of divisions and product segments. Because we serve laboratories, we serve diagnostics, we do research, we service research in every area of science. So if I have to explain to you, I also handle logistics of a $4.5 million electron microscope, which is going into a research laboratory in India. And we also handle a very small chemical of approximately 50 milliliter, to give it to some pharmaceutical company to conduct some tests. So that's the variety, both in terms of SKU complexity as well as in terms of the value which we handle. So we don't have a one size fits all approach in supply chain whenever we deal in Thermo Fisher. So that's a bit of an introduction from my side. Now coming to the topic of the discussion. Uh, the way I look at it is that you have to decide what you mean by sustainability first. And I think given the COVID era we are living, and we have experienced a disruption, then we have also experienced disruptions at global level. We also experienced a bit of an erratic wave which come in and come go. So it's always kind of an adjustment mode for us. So for me, the first of all, the sustainability means that how are you ensuring that you are resilient in supply chain, you are responsive in supply chain, and most importantly, how you will keep your people safe in this kind of environment. So sustainability also means safety for your employees, a network sustainability, how automated your processes are, how less dependent you are manually. So that is the first level of sustainability or resilience I will talk. The second is I would say kind of a medium term is to start looking at sustainability in what context. So there will be a context which is non-controllable. For example, Ukraine Russia war. We have no role to play as a country in that, but we are getting affected in various ways because of that, which is like a non-controllable, and then controllable. So what we can control, and I would say that focus on what we can control ourselves in driving a sustainable supply chain. And the third one is preparing, rather than preparing, be committed to an idea that the organization for which you work, it valuation in terms of stock, and that's everybody understands nowadays these days, is going to grow if you are a very sustainable, if you are a ESG compliant organization which is driving this philosophy in the ecosystem you operate. Case in point, if you look at Tesla, Tesla makes tons of money through the credits it gets for driving the sustainable, and it's one of the most valuable, I think perhaps the most valuable large company in the world today. On the other hand, if you look at ITC, which is a conglomerate, a giant in India, because of ESG reasons, that's why it doesn't command that kind of a valuation. So ESG is something which is coming, which has already come rather, and it is seen as value adding to every stakeholder in which the organization, in the whole ecosystem in which the organization operates. So the commitment of the leadership should be that we have to drive an ESG compliant or ESG friendly or ESG driving kind of an ecosystem. And therefore, the long-term intent, therefore, is look at technologies which are coming, how fast, how soon you can adopt that technology within your own organization. And then what you can do in the area of what we call scope 2 emissions, which are indirectly the one you purchase through energies. The third one, the scope 3, which is like indirect, completely indirect from the perspective of the vendors. So how are you going and selecting vendors who are equally committed to the ESG agenda? I think that's the long-term strategic part of the whole game plan you need to prepare on sustainability. So I'll just take a pause here and I'll hand it over back to Nitin for him to carry forward the discussion. These are my opening remarks.
Thanks, Mr. Saabhai. I think you well covered and also gave a feel about Thermo Fisher Scientific also, and about the mission statement. That's so important that your mission statement itself talks about the sustainability. I would just like to welcome Mr. Jurgen Rock, who has just joined in. Good, almost, yeah, for you also good afternoon now. Yeah, good afternoon and welcome to this third session of sustainability in supply chain management and operations. I'll just for the benefit once again introduce Mr. Jurgen Rocker is from McKinsey and Company, Frankfurt. He has been almost working with McKinsey and Company since 2009 and working on industry, different industries from chemicals, automotive, supply, advanced electronics, and variety of topics. Especially on end-to-end supply chain planning, advanced analytics in manufacturing and supply chain and production optimization. Welcome once again. Before I move to Mr. Yogan, I would request Ms. Neelam to give her thoughts on sustainability in supply chain management and operations. Over to you, Ms. Neelam.
Thank you, Nitin. First of all, I would like to thank CII for inviting me for this call, and Nitin very well started with, and I heard Vivek as well, very well put in, the start on this. And I believe the best day to talk about today is because we are celebrating Earth Day today, 22nd April. So what is the best day, to talk on sustainability when we are on this day of this? So from my point of view, there are two portions that I would like to talk maybe at the starting. One is, you rightly said, Vivek, is the sustainability and the resilience of the supply chain. And second is, yes, sustainability from the goals perspective, from the sustainability, from the environmental perspective. Now, we have all from last 2 years had seen this pandemic. Nobody expected war, but this year we also saw war. With all these, so much external factors, and these factors are not in control of any organization. With so much external factors coming in and impacting. And just to tell you, I belong to an industry of renewable power sector. Nordics Group is part of, we are wind turbine manufacturers. We are the one, we are responsible to give clean energy to our customers. And that's why having sustainable goals are very, very important. It is part of our strategic directions as well. So I was talking about from the resilience side, when we have seen the commodity prices going up, we have seen the logistics costs going up like anything. We have seen people not able to come to work. There has been work impacted. We have seen so much importance of the digitization and all this IT spacing working in this last 2.5 years. And now with the war, we have also seen how quickly as an organization, one is able to ramp up and develop into different geographies. Because yes, there are suppliers, there are customers in those geopolitical affected areas, and that is impacting the overall from the customer as well as from the supply chain perspective. So from my side, the key points on the resilience of the supply chain that I would like to take up is, one is on the faster developments on the supplier side and the alternate, because it's not only our direct suppliers, but many a times indirect suppliers are also getting impacted. Secondly is how fast and quicker you can ramp up, because development is one thing, say, but you need to continue with your regular production. If your first source is not, because we have seen Russian ships are not taking up the material, the suppliers are not able to supply from that region. So how quickly I can ramp up into other geographies? So naturally the vendor diversification makes an important role out here. The other portion that I wanted to talk maybe here is, and I believe the key is right now in that, is how well connected we are with our suppliers, especially the ground level monitoring, because it is not about just having a communications right now and then getting the material. No, it is like understanding your suppliers, your sub suppliers, what level, because they are also facing these same issues. They are also facing the same, all this commodity and all everything. And the fourth point is how well you have done on your contract sides. Because with all this increases up, inflation up, commodity up, oil up, how well you are able to control on your costs, and it depends on how well you have contracted on your contracts with your supplier partners. Now, this is about the first portion, which is about the resilience. The other portion that I wanted to touch upon is on the the sustainability goal side. And as I said, I see, or at least our organization see it from many, the three dimensions. The sustainability from the environment side, sustainability from the social side, and sustainability from the governance side. When I say environment side, naturally, we are talking about technology-driven, roles, technology-driven efforts to reduce on the carbon footprints, or achieving on the zero net waste. We are an organization which works with a lot of hazardous material, like resins and all, for the blade production. So it's like how well we can reduce on the hazardous material waste, because that's very, very important from the environmental side on that. How well we can do on the waste reduction from the packaging side. And it's not only we. When we say we, I'm talking about the whole ecosystem of me, my supplier, my outward logistic in terms of even the packaging things that's going on, my sub-suppliers. The second part is naturally when I talk about the sustainability from the social side. That means health and safety. And Vivek was touching on this. Health and safety, like naturally, if I am working, working towards the overall well-being, whether it is psychological or the physical, and we have seen the importance of it in the last 2 years for the employees, so that we can reduce on the lost hours because of any safety reasons. Just to tell you an example, in our organization, we start every meeting with the health and safety briefing, at least about any topic, so that there is this, in cultural built in the system, that nobody forgets that this is being a prime importance to all of us, whether we are in office environment or at the site environment. Then talking about naturally from the social side is another in terms of having more on the diversity, on the gender, diversity on the geographies and all of the point. On the governance side of the sustainability, and that is where I believe one of the major importance is how well we are understanding and working towards the ESG goal with our suppliers. So when I say ESG goal, naturally having identifying all our high risk suppliers, training them if they are not. If we do have a better, I'll say the learning or the more knowledge on the side, training them on that, not only the suppliers, but the indirect suppliers as well. Having an audits for them, and actually we go to an extent that we built this as a part of our contracts, so that there is an in focus and no deviation, a zero tolerance on the deviation on the sustainability goals, and this I'll say sustainable sourcing has been there. uh, as I said about audits, I said about identification, I said about training on the supplier side, I said about well equipping and identifying and also participating into our kind of industry to understand more onto these things. So I believe these three pillars, the environment, the social, and the governance part on the sustainability, the other side of it, is one of the that makes the overall, and not only environment, but we are talking about the overall strategy per se. And these are my few inputs that I just wanted to put in. Thank you.
Thank you, Neelam. I think both the lenses you spoke about, resilience and also the environment, ESG part of the sustainability. And resilience, I think it's so very important in this world where things are changing so suddenly. When you are thinking that I'm over the curve and then something happens in one corner of Europe and which completely breaks your supply chain. I have one classic example. One particular commodity which we were using in whole of Europe from one country and whole of Americas from another country, and both those countries went in conflict. And how fast you can come up with the supplier, how fast you can come up develop the supplier, it's so very important. And uh, I think very interesting point which you mentioned, that in the contracts itself, you put and you monitor not only the suppliers but the sub-suppliers, how they are monitoring their ESG goals. And I think this visibility at the multi-tier level of suppliers is so very important. We can talk about in our production floor, in our engineering design office, but if we don't manage our suppliers and their suppliers, we fail over there. So good thoughts. Thank you for that. Before I move to Mr. Yogan, I would like audience to say that if you have questions, please type in your questions in the chat box. Put your name, put your organization's name, and put your questions. If your question is directed to any one of the panelists, do mention that to whom you are directing, or else you can leave it. Then I'll take my discretion to direct it to one of the panelists. So going forward, welcome, Mr. Jurgen, and over to you to give your thoughts on sustainability in supply chain management and operations. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, and also thanks for having me here. I couldn't agree more with the themes that were just discussed, right? There are two hot topics at the moment, which is risk and resilience, I mean, obvious reasons in the last 2 years, and sustainability. And the nice thing is we're quickly reaching actually very similar questions, as you've just said. So how do we create end-tier transparency? How do we manage that? How do we create some firmness and transparency there? And therefore, I like a lot also how these topics link. What I would like to discuss with you is especially carbon transparency as a big element, obviously, of sustainability. And while we all know that sustainability is important, let's just look at a few facts from the last years here. And this was already 2019, but even 2019, and that's why I actually like it also when it's even a bit further back, because it's been a hot topic. Even 2019 already, most consumers actually said that they would change their consumption behavior to reduce impact on the environment. And also really acknowledged that this is super important and that companies need to implement programs. Obviously, the point where it gets tricky is if this then results in higher cost. And that's where only 30% of the respondents actually said, yes, we would be willing to pay a premium for it. So interestingly, on the one hand side, it's almost mandatory to do it. On the other hand side, it shouldn't really result in too much of a price increase. But nevertheless, what this also shows very tangibly is, if you look at the right-hand side, growth of sustainable products has by far been higher than those of conventional products. And I mean, that's quite amazing that you also see, okay, there is a real return on the investments there for the companies to engage. But at the same point of time, it's not like it's a nice to have, or let's think about if we want to do this. It really becomes an imperative. And this reaches through investors, also the CFOs. Most of the CFOs are feeling the pressure. They have to do something in sustainability. It is also that most of the biggest companies are really committing to transparency and to also some clear commitments. And it does really have a tangible financial impact. So what I would also say is, don't think about, is it now worthwhile doing sustainability? What's the return and so on? If we're talking consumer goods, for example, I mean, if you're, and suppliers to consumer goods, if you're not committing to sustainability goals, going forward, you might simply be out of any procurement processes. So you will not be really considered even. So from that perspective, really, it's must-have as a bottom line. And then when talking sustainability, most people are initially thinking about, well, how can I reduce my own emissions? And I mean, you see already for many years there are also efforts to bring down energy costs, internal efforts to reduce, I don't know, cost for heating, for electricity, for gas, and so on. But then also second step, I mean, and that's scope 2, quite popular. How can we actually invest into more renewable energy when we buy energy? Those are, I would say, the somewhat easy levers. Don't get me wrong, still quite a big challenge behind them. But I mean, that's what is in your immediate sphere of influence. But where it becomes really interesting is actually scope 3 emissions. So emissions caused by your suppliers, but also further down in the value chain with your products. And if you see at the bottom, that just highlights a bit what's the share of the scope 3 emissions in the different industries. And that's actually quite interesting. So with a few exceptions like cement or fertilizer, actually the vast majority of the emissions are not in your immediate sphere of influence, but they are in the scope 3 emissions. And so what this actually means is, if you want to really credibly tackle sustainability, then you need to go beyond your own sphere of influence. You need to work with your suppliers and you need to work with your customers there. And that's also what actually large numbers of companies commit to. So very often you see now, and driven a lot by consumer goods companies, you see companies really commit to ambitious scope 3 emission targets. And we're talking here about large reductions in the next 10 years. We're talking here about carbon neutral really by 2030 or 2050. Those are the typical goals that companies are setting. And you just see this also exploding in terms of now how many companies jump on this train and basically also really commit to doing something. So for example, with most of my clients also in even chemical sectors or so, they are really committing to very, very ambitious targets that I would say 5 years ago, nobody would have actually dared to even talk about it. So the question is, how do we actually get there? First of all, it's not that this is a completely new type of transformation in the sense of now you need to reinvent really everything. But basically, it is classical transformations that are adapted in certain ways. So while all of the classical elements still need to be there, it's still with an adapted timeline, for example. It is working with more uncertainty at the moment. We won't have 100% transparency on the emissions bottom up, right? And it is working way more heavily with external partners. Second, it's a lot about combining actually really fundamental work there, as in reworking processes, reworking policies, with then also some quick wins that can be driven indeed on a faster timeline. And if I look at my clients, a lot of these quick wins actually center around energy procurement, because that's indeed something that that can be impacted quite quickly. But then third, it's not this typical 2-year program. It is a program that will run over the next 10, 20, 30 years. But it's also not like we have now 5 years to just wait and see what do we do. I mean, right, we have to get started now if we want to have a tangible impact in the next 10 years. Then fourth, it's also about really doing capability building and education with also the internal stakeholders. This sense of sustainability and also what's carbon consumption, that needs to become way more present, and people need to understand what are the drivers there. How do I personally also impact that? And fifth, I mentioned that briefly already, but very explicitly again, it's a lot about collaborations and partnerships when we're talking sustainability. It is working with external partners to create transparency, but especially to tackle scope 3 emissions. And that's an essential part of the work here. So to realize that, what we typically say is it's actually 3 big elements. It's on the one hand side, really creating transparency and setting targets, and I'll come to that in a second. And then second, the actual transformation, which is fixing fundamentals such as policies and processes. Second, engaging with partners. Third, also thinking through what are some of the fundamental changes, how to rework, for example, the business model, or what can we do actually to influence sustainability from a broader perspective. And then third, also working on the underlying enablers. And this, as I said, this still requires a typical transformation approach. It requires a rigorous monitoring and tracking of activities, but also capability building. So in terms of transparency, And I don't want to go through in detail, but what you see here is a typical abatement curve. So what is, and that's something that that stands at the beginning of creating this transparency, that you understand what is really causing my carbon, but more essentially, what are the levers that I can pull in order to reduce it. So what you see here is the gray is the typical carbon price, and then you see here the individual measures, basically what you can do in order to reduce carbon. The width is basically the impact it has. And basically here where it stands on the y-axis is the cost related to it. So for example, negative means actually I'm saving even cost by pulling those levers. So I can reduce carbon while also reducing cost. And I mean, that's the no regret moves, right? Do it. But even if you now go into some of the other levers, so for example, this one here, switching from grid to renewable electricity in this example. Yes, it comes with a bit higher cost, but at the same point of time, if I factor in carbon cost, it is still overall a positive as a net cost effect. And so that's a bit how to read this curve, that you get transparency, what can you do, and then have a conscious discussion also, where do you want to invest basically? Is this also adding cost or saving cost net? And then along the 3 dimensions of now actually creating impact, there are many good examples out there of companies that are active in those fields. And maybe just to highlight a few points here. So when we're talking about policies, it's also a lot about in procurement. How do you select your suppliers? What do you require from them in terms of now transparency on their sustainability journey, just as an example. Or if we're going into now product design, for example, working on, can we reduce actually packaging sizes? Can we make it therefore cheaper to transport things? Can we transport more things at the same point of time? But also really fundamental business model changes. So for example, I'm just working with actually a company that's not listed here, with an energy provider that is on an ambitious journey to really move 100% to renewable energy. And it's one of the major energy providers out there. And that's actually the interesting cases, I would say, moving forward. So last but not least then, what are the cornerstones of really making such a journey successful? It's first fixing really the carbon accounting fundamentals. And it's not about now trying to be perfect there. It is really about getting started rather than like a MVP logic. Let's start with the easy things. Let's add things basically as we get more transparency, but get started with it. Second, then also do not just basically take averages there, but where you can get exact data, use that. So best examples, a lot of my clients are investing heavily into creating transparency on their actual energy consumption in production sites, but not on a site level, but really on individual machine level. And that's where this gets interesting, because then you also understand where you actually have levers. The third one, it's also not like that there will be 1 or 2 big levers that will just change everything and solve it for you. In the end, this will be a tedious journey where you really need to turn every stone. So really look across all of the processes, across the entire supply chain, bring in, build alliances, bring in partners, work on this. And that's the fourth one then, don't try to solve this on your own. There are many alliances out there, many partners that are trying to solve this issue. And it's really also partnering with peers. It's really make use of the network, make use of everybody basically working on this topic, and try to get in these partners. And then the last one, as already said, bring this on top of the CEO agenda. This needs to be a company effort overall. This cannot be basically now effort of an individual function or so. And then it's a lot about capability building and education across across the company and also with your suppliers and customers. So much maybe as a quick run through also on carbon transparency and how to drive such a program. If there are any questions, happy to. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Jurgen. I believe you have to leave a little early. So we will have the questions. If it comes, we will send it to Dr. Ganesh, who will then answer or get it answered later. But thanks for your views. And I think carbon transparency and carbon accounting fundamental, I think this it becomes the bedrock for going further. And as Neelam was saying, that multi-tier supplier should be visible. And as you mentioned also, in scope 3 emission is also important. It's not just scope 1 and scope 2, but scope 3 is also. And ambitious targets, I think exploring big bets, that's very important. As I say that aim for the sky, you'll get a terrace. If you'll aim for a terrace, you'll end up on a coconut tree. So let's make big bets. And the commitment from the CEO, Vivek Sarabhai, also said that commitment from the leader, from the CEO is important. And as you said also, so thanks for your views. And I again request audience to keep sending your questions. With the panel discussions, we are more or less through. But since I have Dr. Ganesh over here, I will not leave you just like that without giving few comments. Dr. Ganesh is a logistician with a great mind on sustainability and on digital transformations. So Dr. Ganesh, your views, and we'll let the questions keep coming. And thanks once again, Mr. Jurgen. Please feel free to step out whenever your time gets over.
Thanks a lot for all the of the conference.
Yeah. Thanks, Jurgen. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining. Yeah, I think I probably share some of my thoughts. What is happening today in many of the client situations, right? So I think that would be interesting to kind of share. I think stepping back, as you rightly said, the scope 3 emission, right? That is actually evolving in many of the client situations today. From a logistics point of view, we can decarbonize the logistics. So that is actually evolving a lot. So many companies are actually stepping back and figure out how we can actually measure the carbon emission. Right today, I mean, from a logistics point of view, at least let us baseline ourselves, because where are we today in our complete end-to-end network? Where are we today? So that is one element which people wanted to understand it, because today we want to measure the baseline first, and after that we can actually see what are the different levers we can step back and think through to kind of move ahead and reduce the carbon emission. Right. So that what is evolving today, at least awareness. Let us understand where are we today, what is our carbon emissions, that baseline measurement, baseline setting is evolving in many of the client situations. That is, I think, it's not only from a westernized world, even India. Imagine like a tire company wanted to understand, they have like a close to like 2,500 dealers, they have 100 depots, huge complicated network. They want to understand what is the current baselining. At the same time, the warehousing, right? Even the warehousing baselining. So that awareness evolved in India and Asia point of view. That is number one. Now, number two, see today, consumer demand is shifting a lot, right? So the rural, urban, and the metro, this is all actually shifting a lot. Because of that, the demand, the overall demand density shifts. Then the network has to be redesigned, right? So what I've seen in the last 18 months or 24 months, revisiting the entire network, how many number of warehouses, where to keep, what is the right flow, the product flow has to happen. This becoming super important for the Asian companies today, because demanding consumer, super volatile demand, and shifting in demand density as well. Because of this, many companies are shifting or at least embarking a journey of network design. While they're doing this, they're not looking only from a cost perspective. Okay, anyway, we are going to redesign a network for the next 3 years. Can we bring the carbon emission? Whether I optimize the network for carbon emission is different. Let me, I think, see a scenario. At least I've seen 5 clients in the last 1 year. Ganesh, I think, tell me from carbon emission reduction point of view, how my network look like. I may not implement it. Let me see what it costs for me. For example, if I have a 12% cost reduction today, I shift my entire warehouse. It's one of the Indian battery manufacturer, right? They actually have this plant. From plant, it goes to a hub. Hub, it goes to a spoke. Spoke, it goes to a final depot. and they move from a 3-tier to a 2-tier. Because why do I have hub and spoke? See, why the up comes? The low volume, high volatile products are more. I actually have to keep in the hub. So let's improve the forecast accuracy so that we can actually reduce that low volume, high volatile. So can you move from a 3-tier to a 2-tier? So that is the first target. That is very good. While this is happening, right, the client CEO says, okay, I think in Europe it is a norm, in US it's a norm and they have to do it. In India, I think it'll come slowly. Before it comes, let me understand this. Then I think run a scenario. Imagine I'm getting a 18% reduction in the cost in my network design. If I don't compromise carbon, what would be that, right? So we made a scenario. So with a complete cost optimization, you get an 18% cost reduction. With also keeping in mind there are erratic roads, I mean, the combination is actually has to be talked to very differently, right? Let's say northeast area, I probably can cover differently, and south is differently. So, okay, I'm going to keep my warehouses as well, my optimize my flow, considering the carbon emission as well. The 80% has gone to 17.3%. So it's a 0.7% reduction in the cost. Okay, good. I think in order to, so now I think 0.7 will be implemented or not, it's a different game. At least the thought process come on the table, right? There is a loss in the a little bit of value, but still the awareness has come. So now my point is, you need to start thinking this. Otherwise, your competitor already start thinking this already, and they are going to strategize this in an effective way. In maybe next 3 years, in next 4 years, they have another run. That's what the CEO said, right? So if not now, I think anyway you have to do in next 3 years. Let me keep this as a basis. In next 3 years, I'll probably do this. I mean, he didn't optimize the network with respect to combination. He optimized only for cost. But I salute him. Actually, he actually brought in the table to kind of evaluate the scenario, kept on the table. Ganesh, I think when do we have to revisit? I said, like, see, if you ask me a decade before, people will look at every 5 years or 3 years. Now, people even look at a dynamic network design. In every 2 years, you have to revisit because there are shared warehousing concept evolving. There are multiple concepts evolving. With that, you have to have a dynamic network design. Then say, okay, fine. Let me keep this now. In 2 years, I'll evaluate. I think that awareness has come on the table. So one of your competitors is going to evaluate in 2 years, and you haven't thought about it till now. It's an alarming problem, right? It's an alarming signal because the consumers are very sensitive. They want a transparency, and they actually want to have a sustainable product, sustainable setup. I think this awareness is happening in I would say next generation. Looking at a carbon, sensitive, right? So very simple example, right? So my son was saying, right, Daddy, I think let us go to this restaurant. This restaurant said net zero goal for carbon emission. So I think it's a third standard student who understands the carbon emission today, and he presented today in the school, as Neelam was saying, right, today. What are the ways in which we can reduce carbon in house? He was thinking that. So this is evolving from a next generation people. They are very sensitive. They want to have a transparent setup. So the consumers are evolving in a different way. So it's going to be a little tricky for us. So if you don't think that now, then it's going to be we'll lose the game for sure. That is what evolving, right? And this is from an Indian and Asia context. But in quickly, right, from a westernized world, people are stepping back and thinking the vehicle design itself. How do I actually optimize the vehicle design? The vehicle aerodynamics. So that is actually happening a lot. That is one. And second is, how do we step back and think through from a loading optimization? So today we do loading optimization. So very simple, right? I just go and ask for one of my clients, how do you load? I'm loading for last 30 years. I know how to load, I load. So right. So I think that is true. And then there is obviously human judgment, and he knows how to load, and good, but the mix is evolving today. So given the product mix, given the different product category, the optimization by the human being definitely far low than the system. And few companies are now stepping back and thinking, well, I have a loading pattern optimization through a system. And one of the tire company, in India, I think tire is a very different product where loading, we do horizontal loading, vertical loading, but there is something called, the zigzag loading, which is like a very different loading. And people will say, no, this will actually this affect the quality of the product. But in Michelin and other company in Western world, they actually do a complete, the zigzag loading, which actually brings 30% reduction in the overall loading, the volume itself, right? So that way, I think now loading pattern, people stepping back and thinking, oh, this will reduce number of vehicle. Okay, that is sustainable. So if you ask me, the basic levers in logistics has been, people are stepping back and thinking, okay, can we think through from a combination of both commercial plus sustainable, right? So I think you as a leaders, you have to think through both angles. I mean, to get a management attention, boss, if I do this 10 different initiatives, this will actually have an impact on cost reduction, and this also have impact of sustainability, which is carbon emission reduction. Then there is a pull. Obviously, there is a interest in the investment, and everything will come from top management, right? So that's what I'm seeing in the client situations. People are looking at from a let's take a lever of commercialization. How do we kind of reduce the cost? At the same time, how do we kind of do a win-win of sustainability, right? So that way, modal shift, load consolidation, the footprint optimization, all this actually happening from a logistics point of view, the vehicle design, the vehicle aerodynamics, the fuel technology. I think people are now exploring biodiesel, synthetic fuel, electromobility, BEV. I think somebody would have actually all hydrogen FECV, right? Especially from a context of fuel availability, engine availability, infrastructure and cost. You have to evaluate, obviously, the fuel technology in all the dimensions, right? But imagine at least natural gas, LNG, CNG availability is good. Engine availability is also good. Carbon emission is also fantastic. But infrastructure-wise, how do we kind of think through? So evaluate this fuel technology is also very important, and figure out how we can evolve this. And this is what I think evolving in many clients' setup. And the carbon capture and storage, this is also evolving a lot. So imagine how do we kind of do a carbon capture and storage networks around the world? How do we establish the infrastructure? And from the parts, from the manufacturing point of view, 3D printing, which is additive manufacturing, is also evolving, where this is also a very good technology lever. At the same time, this will help us in terms of optimizing the carbon, right? So I think let us actually put down a standard levers like a load optimization, routing optimization, modal mix, and so on and so forth. Some will have a high impact in cost, medium impact in carbon emission. Some will have a low impact in cost, high impact in carbon emissions. But see what you can actually start the journey now, because if you start late, then it's going to be like a sorry figure later. So let us actually step back and think through some of our initiatives by now. This is what I wanted to share, Nitin. I probably wait and hear from others as well. If anything required, I'm happy to share some more. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Ganesh. I think it's so good things come out, and when I'm just reflecting back on what you said, that in an Indian or an Asian scenario, it's the cost which drives, and then there is a thought is there. Okay, let's bring in, if I'm saving this much, if I spend a little bit more and it's sustainable, it's helping my ESG, why not? And on the Western world, the thought is different. Let me redesign something to do the ESG. But I think in the net in both sides, the awareness is there, and the things are happening not only in terms of sourcing, not in terms of logistics, but also in terms of product design. And that's where you can redesign your products to be more sustainable, more cost efficient, which can enable your logistics and all. And one thing which you mentioned very rightly, that get your baselines. What you can't measure, you can't improve. So get your baseline, get your basic measurements in there, and then start identifying the levers to bring it a little bit better. And as you mentioned, 3D printing, additive manufacturing, I'm a big fan. When I see some of the companies which were making laser cutting machines are creating this additive manufacturing machines. This can change the logistics quite a lot. So thanks, Dr. Ganesh. We don't have other speakers right now. I have few questions which are present from the audience. I will pitch it as per my convenience and discretion to three of you. I have three questions right now. I'm not sure. The first question is from Mr. Shekhar Vanage from Godrej Estec. It's more related to chemicals and China. But I will anyway take this question and maybe direct it to Dr. Ganesh. For most of the chemicals, we are dependent on China, and last 2 years supply were uncertain in case of some issues like pandemic, lockdowns, energy crisis, etc. What is the solution to overcome this challenge? I think it's a common challenge. Anybody who would like to, I'm directing it to Dr. Ganesh, but Neelam, later if you want to pitch into this answering or Mr. Vivek Sarbai, please feel free.
The question is, how do we handle it? I know we are now caustic soda.
How do we overcome this challenge?
Pardon?
How do we overcome this challenge? It's a evolving issues. Today it is with China, tomorrow it can be with Ukraine or with somebody else. So how do we overcome? That's how I figured this question. That
right.
It's specifically for chemicals. I believe it is for APIs, for pharma. Because most of the APIs are coming from China, but I'm just broadening it up as a general question that when you have a single source and there is a challenge over there, how do you overcome that challenge?
No, I think very good question, because today, imagine I'm serving this in another client in a similar setup, not from China or somewhere else, but let's say soda ash or caustic soda or a synthetic fertilizer or a fiber, it's all happening from China today, right? So at least today, these are the chemicals which is getting at least going to different country. So I think it's a very, very good question. Today, in our recent survey of McKinsey, right? So in the COVID world, what are the 3 things people actually have done differently, which is not from a sustainability aspect only, it is also from a generic aspect. The dual sourcing is coming into the first game plan, right? So from a resilience point of view, I want to have a supply chain resilience on the table. Because earlier we had only operational risk. Today, I think there are more risks. Operational risk, reputational risk. That's where sustainability comes into picture. Because reputation is one of the important area where I am a net zero goal company. I actually want to have a reputational element on the table. So there are 7 different types of risk evolving. From that angle, people are stepping back and think through the complete partner ecosystem. How do I actually have my entire partner ecosystem into a sustainable agenda? So that, imagine HUL or Apple or top companies are actually stepping back and thinking not only from an internal angle, how do we kind of have a complete my external ecosystem, be it a 3PL logistics service provider or warehouse service provider or a supplier, how we can enable them to, number one, actually over existing one, how we can enable them to kind of make a sustainable agenda. So the same thing happened from a Chinese angle as well. So imagine one of our tire company have a auto OEM, 2-3 different companies. They actually have a lot of import from China. There are 2 things they are thinking. One would be, how do we, China also, they also enter into a new era of sustainability. Right? There is also the green economy which is evolving, because they also think through this is one of the important area. So within the China, figure out the sustainable supplier and a green supplier. So that is one dimension they are thinking, right? So come on, I actually have this set of supplier here in China, but I cannot go out of China. I have to be in China because there are actually reliance to it. So I need to do it. But I think, can I move to a different supplier, alternate supplier, where actually embarking a journey of sustainability? That is one dimension people are thinking. Second, alternate sourcing. How do I develop alternate sourcing? That's where the dual sourcing element comes on the table. Today at least 3 out of 10 companies in the last 18 months established dual sourcing in a rigorous way, not only from a resilience, even from a sustainability angle. I think these 2 things are evolving today. From a sustainability agenda, move to a supplier who actually embarking this journey, or bring a program how the supplier can actually get into this journey. That is actually happening by many auto OEM company. They are actually asking their supplier to kind of transform this, and they are also giving a different discounts, and there are different other programs they actually have it to make them evolve into this particular agenda. That is one. Second, I actually step back and think through. Earlier we said, let us not do a nearshoring, let us do a globalization. One of the Philippine company was asking me, right, Ganesh, I was much worried. I'm a nearshoring company, but I am the one who was very much happy when the COVID comes. I am the nearshoring company. So that's why he was actually not affected at all. But I think we are not advising that nearshoring is the right solution, but we need to have the right proportion. So the nearshoring also it's kind of a dual sourcing of nearsourcing with sustainability agenda. That's what I think people are thinking. Imagine at least in India, if you ask me, the survey says 43% of the people has gone into a dual sourcing in the last 18 months with the 3 agenda: resilience, sustainability, as well the cost. So how do we kind of evaluate this? This actually will somehow kind of cover this, the sustainability part of question as well. This is my thought, my experience. Maybe would love to kind of understand from Neelam and Vivek as well.
So, Neelam or
Yes.
if you would like to put your thoughts into it.
I'll just add up. So the fact here is, yes, China is responsible for at least 27% of the whole global supply as on today, whether it is commodity, whether it's chemical or anything. So that means that they are the biggest suppliers to the world. And yes, we saw the last 2 years when COVID has picked up there, the whole supplies were, blocked. And that is the time, what Dr. Ganesh rightly said, that was a time when the organization realized that the dependency on one geography cannot be there. So develop the vendor, increase your vendor density, and also increase the density in the geographic. Don't only concentrate into one particular area, because we have seen how these external factor impact, like what we are right now seeing into the war situation. If you are just concentrated into one area, you're going to get impacted. So the lesson number 1 here is diverse your geographic, vendors geographically, develop them fast and ramp up them fast. You need to have, and I'll tell you, other than alternate to China, there is India, there is Taiwan, there are other low-cost countries. People are looking towards now for these alternate vendors. Second part, rightly said, when it is going on, it's along with the sustainability points. But as I said, more from the perspective, the first point that I wanted to mention is this is how one can build up a more resilience ecosystem of the whole supply chain. And the world has learned now, the organization have learned now. I believe if there is any other wave of pandemic, we will be much better prepared to counter such issues now.
So, Mr. Sabhai, if you have any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'll just give some few examples. So first of all, I'll go back to my original comment, which I made in my opening remarks, that we have to start understanding the problem in terms of what we control and what we don't control. So if there is some supply disruption, I mean, if the government of China is not allowing anybody to come out and lockdown, and the manufacturing is stopped, the shipping industry is stopped, you really can't do much about it. What you can do are a couple of things. In the short term, you can look at how critical is that product for your own manufacturing or your own own manufacturing. Can you produce something and sell something different so that your own internal targets are met? And if it is critical, then you will have to go and inform your customers that these are the reasons, if you really can't find any alternative source. So that's a short-term action. I'm not solving the problem on hand, but I'm just trying to cope with that. So that's a short-term part of it. I think the long-term part of it is, at least in my head, it's very clear. It's a great opportunity for India to start pulling back what it lost to China over the last decade or so. And I think the good news is that the government policies are favoring towards that. And I think organized sector, large companies actually must come together and incentivize or accelerate or play a role of catalyst to develop that critical mass, which is lacking in India, so that they pool their requirements, go to few vendors and say, you start your manufacturing, so that you can localize these things as much as you can. My last comment is from a very different example in my career. When I was working for Coca-Cola, and everybody knows Coca-Cola, so you guys can easily relate to that. If you see the cap on the PET bottle, that cap used to get imported into India, and I'm talking about 95 to 2000 period. It used to get imported, and the critical mass never existed. to set up that capacity in India so that it can be locally sourced. So we used to import from all over the place. And despite lack of critical mass, it took a year of effort with vendor to localize that. And I think the role of the organization here is not just go for always short-term profits, but to make sure that in the long term, if you can incentivize a local manufacturing, and in the long term, if that results in lower unit costs going forward, it's a better decision to make. Now, you can't make 100 decisions like that in an organization where you can compromise short term for the sake of long term, but you can definitely make few decisions every year or every 2 years so that your long term cost advantages are saved, your continuity of business is protected, and you can easily sleep over your business. So I think this is some of the long term aspects. And I think I would again summarize my answer by saying today it's a great opportunity for India to pull back what we lost to China. The policy environment is very friendly. The cost of capital is less. India is not seeing that kind of wage inflation which other economies are seeing. I think India should do much better, and great opportunity for all of us to localize as much as we can.
Agree. I think the market which has exploded in the last 24 months are, Mexico, Brazil, Vietnam, Thailand, India, which is mainly from a chemical angle, right? So which is what, evolved. So wanted to kind of add a point as well.
I think very valid point, and rightly said. And one point I liked, it should not be about the short-term profit, but the long-term goals has to be there. And I think that's where somewhere we in India, even though the opportunity is there, to grab it and to develop it for long-term is the thought which we need to bring in the industry. It's not about just grabbing it, but also developing it over there. And I think your two analogy, what can be controlled, what cannot be controlled, and if we put in these two baskets, I think the decision making becomes very easy. So thanks for these thoughts. I have another question from Mr. Abhineet Kumar from Trident Limited. He asks, and I put this question to all three of you. Please feel free to answer, pick. The question is, in general, the focus is on optimization of resources and logistics. Do you think in these tough times, sustainability focus adds to cost? I think Dr. Ganesh had said this, but I think one more time you can take it up.
Yeah, no. So, so ultimately, I agree. Stepping back, actually looking at a overall decarbonization and logistics, right? So obviously, when you think through from a sustainability angle, yes, it actually add a little bit of cost. But I'll give an example, right? So imagine there are multiple levers, right? It depends on each lever. So imagine like one is a fuel substitute as a lever, or advanced technology as a lever, or energy efficiency as a lever. There are multiple levers, right? So every lever have a different thought process here. But I think at least if I have to say from a logistics efficiency point of view, if you have a sustainability as angle, obviously you will lose a little bit of share of your cost savings. That's what I think happening in 2-3 different from a network design, from a loading efficiency, or from a routing efficiency. From our scenario, what you have seen is, yes, there's a little bit of share we need to get away. But now we have to think through this, right? So what is the other benefit? What is the uplift happening because of this? People are looking at a revenue uplift because of this. How this bring the reputational element on the table, and how this is going to bring the revenue uplift in the market. So we are trying to evaluate that as well. We're trying to build a model for that as well. So what is the regression equation to kind of think through the next generation people who are actually very sensitive on sustainability, and now the customer base can increase because of this is also on the dimensions we have to look at. So that will negate this, obviously, right? So this is first point. Okay. Now stepping back, see, imagine you do a routing optimization as an overall last mile routing, right? Last mile routing, you can do only cost oriented, or you can do cost plus assembly oriented. I can go for an electric vehicle, or I can go for something else, which actually have additional cost, right? But now imagine when you do a routing optimization in last mile without assemblability, let's say 10% reduction. With sustainability, maybe 9% reduction. Now, there's a 1% you need to kind of put on the investment part because you need to buy electric vehicle or something else to kind of bring sustainability angle. But that brings efficiency also. There are indirect benefits there that brings efficiency also, because that is not known and somebody prototype and put on the table and get the value on the table, then we actually can get a sense of it. So in a way, maybe it's in a near term, it's look like there is an additional cost involved, but in longer term, there are indirect benefits, I would say the revenue uplift will happen because people wanted to move to that channel, wanted to move to that sustainability agenda. So that will actually negate the 1% obviously. So that is a quick answer. One real experience what we have seen is in one of our client situations, we actually evaluated 3 things, right? One would be, imagine if I go for a last mile in routing optimization only. We go for last mile, let's say a small scale transporter who actually have a different type of trucks. I just give it to like some CFAs who run the show. Second is next generation players, right? I don't want to name the companies, but next generation players actually kind of take a complete umbrella approach and who can have a very optimized routing, optimized scheduling, and so on and so forth. That is the second. And third is, can I invest myself and then run the show by myself, right? Where the 3 different approach. And in the 3 different approach, the first and third may not work out. The second, next generation player who actually kind of comes and act as a management fee. Boss, I'm investing. You have to only pay management fee, and I'm a 3PL, 4PL. I will run the show with the combination of both cost and sustainability. That actually worked out very well because the large scale 3PL, 4PL, they are thinking this dimension already, and they are actually want to do this already. So leverage them. The channel is already available. Leverage them, and you go to pay only management fees for them, and they are actually investing from sustainability agenda. So it may not be a huge complication for you. Maybe they may charge later, not now, because they actually want to, they also prototype and bring it on the table. But time being, you can leverage the second step, which is large scale next generation last mile player who actually kind of run the show along with both agenda. So that is a short-term solution which I've seen or which we implemented in some client situations where they want to look at from both cost and sustainability angle. I hope this probably gave some idea for people, but yeah, experts Neelam and Vivek, please add on.
Should I add a one-liner here? So, I see this from the 2 perspectives. One, this is, and Vivek rightly said, it is actually a question between a short-term and a long-term benefits return. So if we are seeing, okay, there could be a thought, like if we talk about the earth mobility, that, okay, maybe the the electric is costly compared to the other segment. But do see, compare it 5 years back with the cost of batteries to what it is now, and we know it is going to drop down in the coming on. So it is a question whether we we want to invest into this and actually get a long-term return, because the point is very clear that customers are they are not going to buy, they are not going to support your products if your products are not sustainable and not decarbonized. Every organization has to have at least has to have these goals, because else the whole sustainability of the organization is a question mark. The other side, so that's why I said this is the first side on the environment. The other side, if you look into, and I'm more talking from the shipping logistic part of it, Dr. Ganesh talked about the last mile deliveries, but see from the shipping logistic part of it, and there I'm talking from the sustainability of the supply chain or resilience of the supply chain. We have seen shipping costs gone up. We have seen, but there have been innovative solutions like chartering solutions, dedicated chartering solution, which there are shipping companies which are offering at much discounted rate, provided they get the volume and the confirmed orders from you. So it is, I believe this is the way I do see in. From the decarbonization point, yes, it is a must. It has to be. So it is the short-term investment that needs to be done for the longer-term returns, and this is a mandate. This is not a choice now. So investing into sustainable is a mandate from our customer, from the society, from the organization. So this is what is my say on this.
Yeah. So I would like to just, I was happy to see this question that, as Dr. Ganesh was also saying, that there are people now thinking at least this is a talk which is happening, a question is happening. And as Mr. Sarabhai said earlier, it's a long term, not short term, as Neelam said. And that's what I would say, that don't look at today's cost, don't look at your capex, look at the life cycle cost of the whole thing, what you're going to talk, think about the total cost of ownership over the life of that particular service or the product which you're going to launch. But it is a mandate. It is like Mr. Yogan said, that you might be out of the procurement process. It is, and it is a reality. It's not going to happen in future. It is happening already. So get on the bus, or just stay, get left on the bus stop. Mr. Sarabhai, your views, your thoughts on it.
Sorry, I take a leave. I'm extremely sorry. Since you said bus, we need to change the wheels while the bus is running. So decide how you're going to do that. We can't stop the bus. The bus has to go. The bus has to run. But you need to change the wheel of cost, change the wheel of sustainability. Everything has to happen. Think somehow a Spider-Man or Superman actually has to do it, but now we have to do it. So you decide how you do it. Sorry, you said bus. I thought I'll say analogy. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
So I have a bit, I mean, it's a very interesting question. I mean, we face this question, probably every manager, every business leader. But I have a very different take on it, and I want to share that. I think if all of us, because I come from a very middle class background, I saw that my parents, they wanted me to get educated in the best schools. And I observed that their focus on education was so much that they used to cut expenditure somewhere else, but they made me study in great schools. So what we have somehow lost that philosophy which our parents, which our society inculcated in us, that what we have to decide is whether it is the right thing to do or not. And if we have decided that this is the right thing to do, I'm sure the organization for which any of us work will muster resources and commitment to support that. So that will be my opening 50,000 square foot direction. But now I'll give some examples. So when it comes to logistics, if you see, logistics typically is, and if I just focus on the finished products logistics, warehousing will be contributing to approximately, in terms of total logistic cost, warehouse will contribute to approximately 25% of cost, and majority of the cost will be transportation. Now, if you target improving sustainability, which is like targeting lesser CO2 emissions, I can certainly say that logistic costs will come down because you are making the product travel less. And I'll probably detail this out further in a moment. If you look at warehousing again has got multiple cost elements, but one of the elements is energy, and energy costs, and some products like cold chain is ranging between 50 to 25% of total warehousing cost. Now, if you are able to do renewables there, then overall your cost of operations might come down dramatically. Maybe you will have to incur a bit of a capex. And I think that you have to iron it out over a period of time. If you can ask somebody to invest and amortize it. So in logistics area, if you plan well, and if you integrate well within the organization, and if you drive sustainability, I can tell you 9 out of 10 times the cost should come down for you. So logistic actually is an easy area to drive sustainable agenda than the rest of the supply chain. Another aspect which I think might the audience might probably appreciate is that cost per se is a very divisive by nature, because cost is we understand cost management more by depth, but there is a huge issue or rather wastages which develops because cost by nature is very divisive. It lacks the ability to integrate. So if you start driving agendas like sustainability, The mistake you might do is that you're trying to drive through a function or particular team, whereas these agendas are best run by integrating and getting the right sponsorship from the leadership, and therefore positioning them between the short term and the long term. Because when I say short term versus long term, that dichotomy can be removed by only the business leaders, not by the person who is going to come with that idea. And I think that's the awareness. The person who comes with the idea on sustainability should be aware of, that he has to take it to the topmost level, sell that concept there, and get that sponsorship so that the short term and the long term conflict can be managed at the start itself.
Thank you so very much for these points. And I think the point which you started with the reference of how parents in the earlier generation save money to for the greater good, for the bigger goal. And I think the greater good and the bigger goal over here is sustainability. How we fund it, that's the responsibility of the organization. And I think it has to be driven from the top of the organization. There has to be commitment, as you said in your opening remarks also. I have one last question. I'll put it to both of you. This is from Mr. Arvind Madan from Ericsson India. And it suits to Neelam also, because she covered this point in her opening remark. The question is, as a manufacturing company, we may practice green principles within our organization. How do we involve our supply chain partners in this activity? Are there any exemplary companies who took lead in introducing sustainability practices supply chain wide? This is more like a scope 3 for sustainability tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. So you have done it. So if you can talk a little bit about that, both of you, if you can talk about that, and then we wrap up.
Sure. I talked about this, and I talked about that sustainability goals. When we have, as an organization, we do have our strategy, and in fact, we do have a very clear goals defined. When we have our supplier relationships, when we have the supplier connect, we communicate this to our supplier. Not only this, we do a supplier assessment based on, first of all, when the supplier is getting inducted in the system, that okay, these are the goals that has to be the part of the understanding to go forward for the business. They need to be adhering to it. So that's the entrance. Once we start on the business side, we keep on assessing what they have promised and what they are, where is their baselining, and how are they doing. Because because we do not only consider that, okay, if I am achieving a net zero, or reducing on my carbon footprints, that's it. No, it is about this whole ecosystem of suppliers and sub-suppliers. And as I told you, that because as many a times as an OEM, if we are better equipped on the knowledge side, on the processes side, so in fact we do have this whole knowledge transfer and communication that we do with our suppliers. I can tell you one of the organizations in India, primarily where I had worked before, like Cummins. If you know that in Maharashtra, I believe 2 or 3 years back, when there was this whole restriction of uses of plastic for a particular grade or micron that had come up, and it was a mandate. Many of our suppliers were not prepared at that time, or they didn't have much of understanding that, okay, from where they can get that particular micron thickness of plastic. If that is so, how they should be putting up, because it was mandated that you need to get the EPR numbers, you need to get the buyback pricing done, you need to mention how are you going to take this, and how the whole process of this waste management will be done into the in your system and the organization. That time, these OEMs, whether it is Tata Motors or Cummins, they actually step forward. They have done this knowledge sharing with the suppliers, and when I say suppliers, there were thousands of them. So it's just not small group of it. And then we also made it sure that we go ahead and also interact and do this to our tier 2 suppliers, so that when these kind of policies, when these, so this was just an example, but as a part of the whole our ecosystem, we built in, we do an audit cross checks for a regular business unit. We do audit cross checks with our suppliers. We do annual supplier code of conduct understanding and ask them to sign on this, that okay, they are adhering to it. As I told you, this is part of our contracts, which also makes it legally binding for them to adhere to it. So it is not that they can so whether it is in terms of training them, it is putting up mandated as a part of the system, or it is if they do not have the process understanding or the vendor understanding to get any components related to it, we even support this as suppliers into that. So these are few of the things that we do it all with our suppliers partners as well as our tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers, and we make it sure that it is happening. So it's not that once you have done and now I'm okay with it. There has to be an annual audit, an annual check and assessment of it. And suppose if some supplier is not adhering to it, there is also the business continuity becomes question with that supplier. So this is how strictly it has been adhered into the organizations, in these organizations that I just named.
Thanks, Neelam. Mr. Sarabhai, if you have any point, 2 minutes, and then we wind up. We are left with 4 minutes.
I'll just bit of a build on what Neelam just said. I think if we just remember the presentation given by Julian, I think there are a couple of points which I would like to emphasize. One, that ESG is a galloping trend in the minds of every citizen on this planet, every human being on this planet. It's just a matter of time that, like internet exploded, this mindset will start to explode very, very soon, which essentially means that the future of any organization is tied up today. And if people are not seeing that, then it's a mistake they're committing, that they have to drive this agenda. So it's a top management priority everywhere. It should be everywhere. So I think that is a prerequisite if you want to drive this agenda. I think the second thing which I remember in his presentation he mentioned was that it's a marathon and it's not a sprint. So when it says marathon can be won only when you start somewhere. So an organization like Ericsson, which is a large company, I think if they start to say that in their procurement policies, or if they can in your procurement strategies, that eventually in a matter of 3 to 4 years or 5-year time, they will start to prefer vendors with ESG compliances or ESG innovations, they will start to find that the Indian industry or wherever they are buying from, they will start to respond, because anything which can be linked to business growth or business protection, it's easier for any organization to go ahead and invest. So I think Ericsson can play a big role for their vendors to drive this agenda. And through their procurement policies, through their preferences towards buying from ESG vendors, and I think that should be possible in my view. And they don't, as I said, they don't have to attend 100 projects. They may attempt in a phase-wise manner, whatever they can afford, the big ones or small ones, but start building the culture today is, I think, important for you to reap the benefits 5 to 10 years down the line.
Thanks very much. We are almost there. Just to wrap up, thanks once again, Mr. Sarabhai. Your points with respect to non-controllable context and the controllable context. Try to figure it out where you are and how do you proceed. But the most important point you said, that be committed to the ESG philosophy, and the commitment has to be from the top leader of the company, and it has to be driven down. And it's not a choice; it has to be there. So thank you very much. Thank you, Neelam, for your talk, both in terms of resilience in the supply chain, as well as the sustainability part, and developing multi-layered suppliers where the ESG is part of the mandate, part of your contracts, and it's the sustainability development goals can be achieved on ESG norms all. And it's about how well we work with our suppliers with ESG goals and with sub-suppliers. I think that's very important. Coming to the last presentation of Mr. Jurgen Rock, it was talking about carbon transparency, and it was a very big statement, but very relevant statement, that if you are not part of it, you might be out of procurement process. It's not going to happen in future, it's happening now. So come join. And as Mr. Sarabhai also reiterated the words of Jurgen, that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Have a plan, but start now. If you start now, you will reap the benefits of this, and don't look at the cost, look at the total life cycle of the product and service. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you once again, Neelam. Thank you, Mr. Sarabhai. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you, Neelam.
Thank
Great
you,
interacting
Nitin.
with all
Thank you,
of you.
Vivek. Bye-bye.
Bye.